a platform to share how grateful you are to be in Australia as a refugee and how terrible, your country was and how great that you get to escape war. And as people, myself, Joseph, Shabnam, Simon, and many others in the room, as quote-unquote people of color who work in these sectors of migration, refugee settlement services, we have over the years become aware, and we've known for a while, but we just haven't really spoken about it very much, that there is a lot of space, a lot of airtime for that narrative. But then when it comes to like decolonization, First Nation sovereignty, anti-racism within these same spaces, the conversation is very quickly stifled. And there's not much bandwidth for that. So that's kind of what we want to unpack today in various different ways. We've all got experiences of it. I can already see heads nodding. So a few of you are very familiar with this grateful refugee, grateful migrant narrative. And yeah, I wanted to talk about why this is happening and how we can give language to what's happening so we can stop it happening. So our panelists, I will allow you to introduce yourselves because you'll probably be able to explain a bit more from your work, your background, your history. Is not just your story, how you got here, but what you actually do here in Australia, your qualifications. We've discussed how they constantly give us space to talk about our refugee story, but then we get sidelined when it comes to the actual literal qualifications we have and meaningful action in some of these spaces. So I won't do that part for you. I'll let you start off, Shabnam, and then Joseph, and then hopefully by then Simon would be here as well.
Cool. Is this working?
Yeah, it should be on.
I can't hear anything.
No, just click it. Maybe.
Yeah.
Let me see. You take mine.
Thanks, Joseph. That's fine.
Try that one. Yeah, make it close to you.
I can also scream and yell very loudly, so let me know if you prefer that. Hi, everybody. I think a bit of a disclaimer. I'm doing this in person for the first time in 2 years. I'm pretty sure most of you are in the same boat, but excuse if I do something weird with my legs because I haven't been aware of them for the last 2 years. Right? All of a sudden, I'm like, what do I do with the rest of my body? I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands, the land where we're gathering today. The Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, pay my respect to their elders past, present and emerging. And I think as refugees who've come here, it's incredibly, so much more important to have that connection, to have that acknowledgement and education of the Black history of Australia. And maybe we can talk about that in a little bit as well, of why that doesn't happen, why there is that disconnect. But in terms of introducing myself and not sharing my grateful refugee story, rather my actual story, I'm Shabnam. I arrived in Australia with my family as refugees around 12 years ago. I was 15 at the time. And since then, I've gone through multiple phases of being a refugee, or different waves. I've been a grateful refugee, and then I've been a nonchalant refugee, and then I've been an angry refugee. I think right now I'm in that change-making, space-holding type of refugee at the moment. I think talking about qualifications, by education and by paper, I'm a neuroscientist, but by profession, I'm a community development worker. I built communities, capacity building. At the moment, I'm working at Community Refugees Sponsorship Australia, which is a very new initiative trying to build a sponsorship model in Australia similar to that in Canada for the last 40 years. I'm part of a very small team and working really hard to convince the federal government to make that happen. And aside from that, I chair the National Refugee-Led Advisory and Advocacy Group, which is a new-ish refugee-led body, a national refugee-led body that has come together, actually came together a couple of weeks before the nation went into lockdown last year. So kind of been thrown into the deep end very early on, but the whole purpose is to try and include more lived experience voices in places where it matters, where we go beyond that storytelling mechanisms and actually, have uncomfortable conversations. And when it comes to making decisions and policy, I'll leave it there, and then we can come back.
Thank you. Yeah, totally. You want to kick us? Go next to Joseph. Just tell us a bit about yourself.
So my name is Joseph Johanna. I'm married with 2 kids, so sorry, singles. I'm taken. You want to talk about me, isn't it?
That wasn't their first. That wasn't their first intention.
No, seriously. I'm one of the people who works on the grounds with the grassroots for years, serving the community, trying to bring the voice of the community, multicultural communities, in between 2 brackets, asylum seekers and refugees, or former refugees in Australia, to the platform and try to influence the decision making when it comes to policy and taking, advantage of having us here. I'm a citizen, so that's very important. That's why I call myself former refugees. I hate people when they call me refugee. Yes, I'm proud of my refugee journey, but I'm a former refugee. Refugees who are still stuck in Afghanistan, stuck in the Middle East are the refugees. But when we arrive to Canada, America, Australia, and Europe, we have the ownership to take the citizenship of the country and become part of that, network. I work for Brotherhood of St. Lawrence currently. I'm the community inclusion manager, and also I chair the Australian Assyrian Chaldean Syriac Advocacy Network, which is and more newish than NRAG.
Joseph is an ex-NRAG member. Yeah, he left us to do that.
Yeah, they kicked me out because I don't have time for it. So yeah, NRAG, I had the pleasure to be one of the contributing founders to the agency. And they are doing great. And also being here and there, I'm in different boards. And also I work closely with the UNHCR, being one of the refugee steering group members who speak on the annual tripartite consultation on resettlement and also in the NGOs consultation that comes annually. I'll stop there, but
thank you.
We can explain later.
Sure, yeah, totally.
Too complicated.
You hold the mic closer next time as well, just so we can catch.
Okay, boss.
That's better. Thank you. We'll throw to you, Simon. Now, just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, no worries. So I'm a former refugee from Syria, and I was resettled with my family in 2015. I'm just a graduate from renewable energy engineering, but I have a lot of experience working with refugee-led organizations and in the community of human rights advocacy. So I worked with Settlement Services International, and I worked on a few programs there supporting youth empowerment. And I also worked with Refugee Council of Australia and have been there a speaker, presented lots of schools and workplaces trying to educate the community and society, Australian society, about the plight of refugees and the importance of integrating refugees and some of their hardships and the obstacles that they face along the way of their resettlement. I also have tried to encourage refugees through initiatives of sports and music. So I'm very avid into sports and music. I like running, like Forrest Gump, and but not that far. But I run marathons, and I try to encourage refugees to run as well, because most of refugees, when they arrive to Australia, when they resettle, they have PTSDs, post-traumatic stress disorders. And so running was one beautiful therapeutic mechanism for me, and I tried to pass that experience to refugees. And then music, I was always very passionate in classical music, and I hope all of you are. And I try to also share that with the refugee sectors. But aside from those two things, in little brief things, I mean, I overdressed, but thank you for wearing this. I'm not working in security, if you're asking. I'm not going to a wedding after this, and I'm definitely not playing organ right now. Yeah, just a few things.
Thank you, Simon.
Cheers.
So, why do we need to have this conversation? Like, I know you've got notes there, Shabnam, so I'm not going to ask too many of my own questions because you've got things you want to cover. I know Joseph certainly he's got a lot of things to get off of his chest. But the fact that we need to even deconstruct this situation where the story of the grateful refugee / migrant is something that we so often come across, and it's so easily shared, and we always very easily get a platform to speak about it. But then when we refuse to be the grateful refugee or the grateful migrant, when we start questioning some of the racism embedded within systems and structures, when we start highlighting, the hypocrisy of advocating for the human rights of Afghan refugees, but then the moment we want to talk about First Nations people, we get sidelined and shut down. You've got a great story about that I'm hoping you will be able to share later as well. For me, that's pointing towards this dynamic of like, well, allowing a migrant or a newly arrived refugee or a new Australian to share with us how traumatic or troublesome their homeland was and their journey and how grateful they are to be here allows us to reinforce one of the key elements of racism or systemic racism for me, which is a sense of cultural superiority. From the very beginning, from the 1400s and the 1500s, when the construct of race was being constructed and the Portuguese and Spanish people were removing West Africans from their homelands and enslaving them, it was based on the idea that their culture was inferior and that white culture was superior. So this dynamic now, where we've got Western nations building weapons and sending them to the Middle East for people to fight over stuff, and then we accept a handful of refugees and we pat ourselves on the back for having done that, allows us to perpetuate that lie of cultural superiority. So that's like really just spelling it out. But I wanted to give each of you an opportunity to also share how you experience this in your lives and what it works like for you, whether it's been what happened as soon as you shifted your approach, whether it's what happened when you talk about First Nations sovereignty, or you, Joseph, yesterday you're telling me so passionately about the safe zone people as well. You know, there's the concept of pet or threat from Ruby Hamad's book that I mentioned to you yesterday. Every time I mention that, black and brown people's eyes just light up. So I'm really excited to hear Ruby Hamad speak tomorrow. She has a concept in her book called pet or threat, which I'm hoping that throughout this conversation we're going to unpack as well. So whoever would like, maybe Shabnam, you can start us off and speak to this.
I think, as you mentioned earlier, Irfan, it kind of comes down to the basis on which this whole system is set up. You know, whether that's the charity sector, the not-for-profit sector, the progressive sector, we're still it's historically colonial. It's set up on colonial principles, on colonial values, and no matter how much we try to get out of it, because that is the foundation of it, we can't get any further. And so whilst we need to be constantly be taking active action inside the system to be making those little changes, I think we just need to be working on the side to be changing the system overall, or maybe eradicating it, building something better. It comes because the work done in this space is still so paternalistic. It still comes from that concept of we're here to take care of you because you are in a situation, in a problem that we're not going to take responsibility for creating in the first place, but you know, we're here to help because that's what we do when people are in times of crisis or when they need, because that's our values. So it's that dichotomy, I think, and trying to balance that. For me, my aha moment was when I started getting labelled too political in these spaces, because I started talking about, you know, just to me it was normal discussions. The questions that I started asking, I soon became too political to be in our organization. Sorry, you do great work, but you're just too political. We love your advocacy. You're just too political for us for this role. You know, it has it creeps up in many places. You know, what we do in terms of our advocacy, for example, in our communities, the work with our community is always put on a pedestal. Like, you know, it's such great work. But when we try to translate those experiences and those the knowledge from there into the mainstream, I don't like that concept of you know, multicultural communities in the mainstream, but then all of a sudden it's just too much to handle. And that happened a few years ago when I was just making my way through this industry, for the lack of a better term. Like, it has become an industry, right? The not-for-profit sector, the social justice sector. And I personally have learned, or I'm constantly trying to learn to be speaking the language of both sides, and now I'm a diplomatic person. I'm not too political. I'm just very diplomatic. I know what to say and how to
code switch.
say it. Yeah. So I've picked up the lingo, and it's just so much more harmful when it's happening in the progressive sector, because we keep thinking that we're better than the rest, so we don't hold ourselves accountable. But because we're also the standard that every progress is measured by, then it's just so much more harmful, because then that is the standard that we accept. And, you know, that paternalistic approach is, and, you know, as you said, the grateful refugee, you're only good until you're grateful, whether that's, you know, be it sharing your story on a platform or in a spotlight that's been given to you, or whether that's in your personal and professional work. So in our organizations in this sector, when we start questioning things, then you're all of a sudden not grateful. And that's why we need to be talking more about it.
Thank you. Great segue into Joseph's safe zone. You want to go? Yeah, and then we'll come back to your story from university.
Please go. Just before I forget it, that's. But yes, I was just saying actually on the graph, and I'm not trying to outsmart any of the, you know, there are a lot of experienced social community workers and advocates as well. But, you know, sharing from experience, there is obviously a tokenistic, you know, trend ticking the box of trying to complete a few tasks, you know, relating to refugees. That's not how it works, because resettlement approach, it takes years. In fact, it takes a lifetime. If you imagine you're trying to talk about a refugee who just lost their house and home as in by that their country, they've relocated out of force, not out of choice, and they had no time. Sometimes they've lost loved ones. This brings a lot of traumas, and so it doesn't get solved, you know, with tokenistic approaches, as if someone is just trying to show for the media that they are helping refugees. So that's one. But in terms of the grateful migrants or grateful refugees narrative, well, I'm trying to think that the picture of a refugee doesn't have to be always polished. I mean, sure, sometimes they have barriers in English, other times they're not, you know, as smart as they can be, but they all have opportunity. They deserve opportunities to work and integrate in the society. So why I'm saying this is because the system is sometimes eliminating, unless, I mean, for instance, you are studying, let's say, for instance, studying at university, you will not be able to make it. And for refugees, but some refugees, you know, might be able to go through TAFE, for instance, and then get to university. Why I'm saying that is because refugees, yes, they come with traumas, and yes, they have potentials, but not all of them are, you know, as the media expect them to be, or what the society expects them. So why I'm saying this is just so that I focus that refugees need more help and more humane treatment. And that's just talking about resettlement of refugees, let alone how many refugees have been stuck in refugee camps and they need processing, and that resettlement worldwide is just like 1%. And so it would take 300 years to resettle all refugees with the current rate. So that's my take on the narrative of the grateful refugee.
Thank you, Sam. I'm going to ask you about that story you told about the university experience one day as well. But I'm going to throw to Joseph, please.
I'll tell you a story. Happens with us. In Hume City Council, we've had the highest numbers of COVID-19 cases. And over the months, while there was in an eastern suburbs and southern suburbs, they were accessing visors and communities start taking visor. In the north, which is, we are the gate in from Sydney, we had no visor. And we had the most multicultural communities. At that time, we were calling. May and many others, we were talking about where is the community? How do we, the government community, where are they from the topic? How can we convince the community? We were meeting on a weekly basis with everyone who comes on the TV, you name them. And things didn't work out. It came to the point that we became under the hammer of crisis in the community until few media save zone faces because their skin is dark, or because they have a beard, or because they are, you know, they have verified account on Twitter. They start talking about it. And suddenly the government, oh yeah, we need visor actually in Hume. Let's make it up. And within 2 weeks, you can see everything changed. We became the most welcomed hub for visors. It's not because we pushed it, but because there are safe zone people start talking about it. And we pushed these safe zones people to speak about it because our voice was not there, even though we are the local people. It didn't work out. That's the learning from, one of the learnings that came up from COVID, that even if you talk that you are an influencer, you're an advocator, you talk in a diplomatic way, or you are too politically saying it, it doesn't work out. You need someone who has credits next to the minister, or who gets funds and they are mainstream NGOs and they can speak on your behalf. And that's really upsetting. And it upsets me because even though that I'm one of the people, so I need to have the credit that I've helped to save many lives locally. I didn't get a thank you. The one who got the thank you were Channel 7 and Channel 9. When one phone call, everyone goes and they take photos with that group or other groups. Whereas we've been, screaming over months and months and months. Community started to, go through an agony of losing their friends and families, and no one was hearing. Why is that? Because there is a problem in the system, and that's why we need to talk about it. They are not learning from the mistakes. That's what I hate from Australian politics and the political system in general. We always try to say that we're learning, but we're not learning. Even if we are learning, they learning in kind of very minimum injections of learning, and then they go back to the old classy style of managements. We cannot, and we will not ever going to be treated similar to Brighton or into the areas who are fancy houses there. And we will not going to be there because we're different. You cannot tell me, while like before COVID, maybe you are the third generation Australia, with all my respect. You don't see your mom once a year. It's fine because you travel all the way to the regional and see her once a year. That's a normal thing for you. But when you are in a community that you have to meet with your parents, with your uncles, because they live next door to you, and then you've been called that you are careless or you are selfish, that's a problem because I'm not selfish. I haven't been given a chance to express my way of solutions. And that's why we need to talk about it.
Thank you.
Can I just say something on that? Just your story about COVID and its management or not, or lack thereof in Victoria with multicultural communities. When COVID broke out last year, 3 months into the lockdowns and everything, the Department of Health, Victorian Department of Health, convened I live in the southeast, so we kind of have similar issues that direction. After about 3 months, the Department of Health convened a meeting with the multicultural communities in the southeast, the multicultural community leaders, the chosen ones, the safe ones, the pets, teachers' pets. And when I got that invitation, I was like, oh, finally, because after all of these translation debacles, it was all shambles, the way they were communicating with the multicultural communities, and the fact that anyway, we won't go into that. But after 3 months, we had that meeting, and I was like, okay, we can finally ask some hard questions, like, what are you actually doing? At the time, on top of my mind, Joseph was working quite hard on this with us as well at NRAG, was, the fact that people seeking asylum didn't have access to the support packages the government had introduced. Their visas didn't allow them to do anything else. So they were really left for destitution. And I was really excited to be asking these questions. They had an hour and a half meeting, and for the whole meeting, they did a presentation on how to wash your hands and how to social distance. That was literally all they did.
I'll add 30 seconds. In one of the meetings just 2 months ago, I'm talking about the lockdown 6, and in a very locked zone meetings that it's only specialized people who've been, given the 3 stars here. they can attend. They spoke for 1 hour, the health department and others. I'm sorry, but this is the honest truth. And then one of the persons, as a solutions, how can we respond on Facebook and media? My question was, why do I need to push the community when there is no solutions? I mean, there's no, considering to Sydney, we have no, at that time, we had no clue what's going to happen in Melbourne. And one of the seniors, very senior person in the government, saying that please go to your social media and tell people to wear masks. And I just stopped. And people got angry with me that I am not political. How could you stop her and say to her that? I said to her, are you serious that you want me after a year and a half go back to Facebook and say to people wear a mask? Do people are that dumb to tell them that they need to wear a mask? I'm sorry, if you have something to say, say it. If not, don't talk.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it's a great point, and I want to highlight on that thing.
So
that
apparently I'm not a safe zone anymore since then.
Yeah, apparently we're not. We've been
Blacklisted.
tagged.
Join the club.
We are no longer safe zone brown people. But speaking to that, the safe zone and the too political one. I mean, anyone who identifies as female in the workplace, you've probably at some point in your career been told if you are outspoken potentially. There are words like outspoken that are reserved for specific people. You know, men don't often get called outspoken in the workplace, do they? It's like, it's the secret kind of coded language where it's like, I'm not being sexist, I just said she's outspoken. It's a non-sexist word. So calling someone too political is another way of, like, it's an invisible barrier that you're kind of trying to put a net around somebody. And I want to talk to that a little bit because it really rests on cultural superiority. The idea that for centuries we had the construct of race that justified colonization and slavery and genocide that came with it. And only really, how many decades has it been since anti-discrimination and civil rights movement and all the rest of it? It's only been a single generation, you know what I mean? Like, I've got Indigenous Australian friends who are born in missions, and I've got, you know, in my parents' lifetime, the White Australia policy was still in place up until 73. So I think there's still remnants of that in society. And there's still remnants of, like, how dare a black or brown man or woman be outspoken, to have an opinion, or to critique our systems and our politics and our policies. We've saved you from Afghanistan or Iraq or Iran or wherever it happens to be. And I think Syria, wherever we happen to come from. And you said something earlier, Shabnam, that I'd like for you to continue speaking about and for the rest of the panel to speak on, which is the pain that it causes when it comes from within the left-leaning so-called progressive space. Personally, I've been told everything from go back to where you came from to plenty of boat people out tonight, all sorts of stuff. And that actually doesn't bother me as much as when a senior executive at an international human rights NGO said to me in a meeting which I was consulting for, one day I want to work towards building a country where one day someone like you can have a job like mine. That was like after having written 3 books and have a master's in communication for social change. That wasn't when I was a teenager. That's the kind of world we're still functioning within in the left-leaning, progressive, refugee migrant settlement spaces. And I would like to, with having shared that story now, hopefully it sparked a few memories for all of you. What are your thoughts on that? What are your memories, reflections on that? And how can we weed this out? Because it does hurt more when it comes from places like that than when it's a redneck calling you, telling you to go back where you came from.
Yeah, because you expect them to do that. What you don't expect is when one of your own hurt you. And very similar stories, very similar experiences. I've had multiple breakdowns. Something happened last year in the middle of COVID lockdown and everything, and in my professional life. And I just remember being in my living room in tears, going, "What is wrong with me?" I was. A very, very similar comment was said to me too. I'd applied for a job that I thought I was very, very capable of doing, and the right person to be doing it too, given the field of work it was. But I was essentially told that it's just by the hiring manager that it was just her ego, because I would be replacing her, and she cannot see herself being replaced by a 26-year-old former refugee Muslim woman. How can something that she's been working on for 20 years that someone like me can come and just do that job, but do it better, because we understand it. We understand the insights of we know how our communities work, so we should be doing that work in the first place. That's why it's so much more harmful, because when I tried to explain that to HR, they were like, what? Yeah. But what do you mean? Can you elaborate a little bit more? Like, what?
The gaslighting is like
mean?
next level.
In hindsight, maybe it was a good thing. It didn't work out. You know, I'm quite happy where I am right now, but that's why it's harmful, because it's those practices that we don't see. And we don't expect from the progressive sectors, and that builds the standard that people accept for this work. You know, we walk past it. Having said that, though, we also do get pigeonholed into those community engagement worker roles, or, you know, we do. There is the two sides of the spectrum there, where, you know, you're either a person, you're either considered just a person without your culture or race, or, you know, all of your multicultural experience, and just your professional colonial qualifications and experiences is what matters. Or on the other side, you're a person who's only considered a safe zone because they are from the multicultural community, and, you know, you understand best, so you be that. There's not much bridging happening. There's not a lot of acceptance of both those identities, both those experiences, and actually seeing it as a strength, as you know, the fact that it's as expertise, or the fact that it's so much more than others in that space have, that you can bring to the table and offer, rather than be the person people get scared off because you're too political.
Yeah, thank you.
So, and if I may just talk about transparency. So I don't think there is a lot of transparency. And yes, we have empathy, but transparency, by that I mean, I'm going to give, for instance, one day I was applying to this job at university, and then I was accepted. I had enough experience in 2018. Even now I have a lot more, humbly saying that. And then when I was just doing little, you know, catch up, or how bit of a conversation, right? And with the peers, it slipped out of my tongue. Just I was talking about that I've noticed that there are many unfairly incarcerated Aboriginal youth. And so that by itself thrust someone to think that I'm political. And then the following day I received an expulsion from that position that I was applying to, and I was already accepted to. I had the receiving letter. I received the letter. So it showed me, no, they're not worried about politicization. This is a problem of transparency. They have not had education enough, and this is a university level, to talk about such ground issues, such grassroots, such essential issues, let alone put in and discussing them and trusting others with it. So that was one issue. But then I also got rejected a lot. I mean, I've been accepted throughout the past 6 years since my resettlement in Australia in 2015. I've been accepted in many scholarships and positions and programs and politics, but I've been rejected in many. But those have thrust me into a dogged mode of perseverance, because I know that I deserve those positions. I have the criteria and qualifications, and I always refused those narratives and those scenarios where someone is rejected because of their race or ethnicity or something. This is the classical traditional story, of course, but this does not apply to me. I just always accept myself as an Australian, and now I'm Australian citizen this year. But the point I'm trying to make is that I always accept myself as another Australian fellow. So this perseverance has been very fruitful in my career and my progress in this resettlement journey. But I do acknowledge that I have had a lot of hiccups and lots of such scenarios as the one I've just mentioned. And it just shows there is a lack of transparency. It's a simple word, but if you contemplate in it, you just think that, you know, we are not prepared to talk about these topics yet. You know, we need to have special rooms for them. We can't speak, with all the respect, just saying the words. But the point is, this requires a lot more work.
I'll ask questions. Multicultural communities who are in a space, are they multicultural because they have multicultural staff, or because they provide multicultural services? Yeah. Who believes it's about multicultural staffing? That's good. Because many, I'm not saying all, of the multicultural communities, organization, not-for-profit, They bring people like this, space. I mean, they bring someone who speaks the language, and they say, and they celebrate that person. And after they celebrate that person, it's either between, it's a fine tune between use and abuse. So using, it's fine. You are utilized because you have experience dealing with the grassroots community. But abused is when you are being pushed to translate things, when you push to do things above and beyond just because you speak the language. And then 3, when you are not recognized on your position descriptions to be paid for the language services you're doing. And that's a big, massive problems in the contracts, big, massive problems in the agreements, community agreements, when it comes to bringing people just because ticking boxes, just because you are there, because you speak Arabic or you speak Afghani, Dari, whatever. And I hate it. And it comes to the point, the Anglos, the white people, that we try to consider them managers and leaders and hiring managers, but unfortunately they are very blocked and narrow-minded. They start talking about the practice of dealing with bilingual workers, and you are bilingual workers, and then apparently you are accused that you got a job. Apparently you are accused that you got a job because you speak the language, not because of your bloody experience of 20 years or 10 years in the sector, and you studied hard and you worked hard on yourself and you managed to bring finance and bringing budgets and achieving so many things. But you've been given in a corner that, you speak the language, that's why you are here. Yeah. No, I'm not.
Yeah, it's like
that's a big problem. We should talk about it.
Because you get, yeah. It's great. I'm going to add to that and then throw to a question, because you're absolutely right. You see the diversity in these spaces, in any space, whether it's a corporate organization or migrant refugee settlement services, it doesn't matter. There's a level to which staff will set to. Everyone's familiar with the phrasing of the glass ceiling, right? There's other ceilings as well. There's the bamboo ceiling. There's all sorts of other ceilings where certain people just can't get past. So on one end, they're not. The system doesn't allow certain people to progress. And then when you do, it's like, it's because you're a brown person. It's because you're bilingual. That's why you got this job, not because of your skills. So it's like you're getting slapped both ways.
You remind me of Scrubs. There was one about it, yeah.
Yeah? Sorry, I don't know that episode.
No, yeah, but I was saying you're looking for empathy constipated. That's what you want to talk about.
So I'm gonna throw to a question. See if there's an audience question you'd like to throw to one of the panelists. Yes. Thank you.
Only one discussion.
We have so much more to say.
Thank you.
But how do you cut through all of that political correctness that is and the corruption that we see? Big question.
How do we cut through political correctness?
I've got an answer, but this is going to be politically correct. I mean,
politically incorrect, is it? Yeah. Go for it.
Look, I mean, fixing the corruptions, you need to be one of the corrupted to get up there and try to fix the corruptions inside. So
that's one way.
Definitely. If you are on a ground floor, and I was talking to you a few days ago, how many from the refugee backgrounds people are leading positions across Australia? All name for me. There are thousands and thousands and thousands working in admin, case managements, front doors, but they're not in the leadership. And same thing when you go to the government offices, you can see in Canberra the same color. If you've been too bright, I mean too much. They need to turn off a bit of lights, and that's a problem. I think it's about connections to fix the corruption. That's my answer.
Connections, yeah.
Can I also mention stress to not forget the role of government itself in this corruption, in this corrupt industry and corrupt sector? Because when government puts out a $4 million budget to help the multicultural communities, what happens is that the multicultural communities, or those who serve the multicultural communities, they fight over breadcrumbs with each other. Why can't we have the same services, the same programs that are for the mainstream community also serve the multicultural community? Why do I have to access refugee programs, asylum seeking, people seeking asylum programs for them to have my mental health addressed, for example, or to have my health, physical issues, or my financial issues addressed? Why can't I just go through the mental health, the mainstream mental health sector, right? So there's this big pool of money for everybody else and this tiny little bit, because, you know, once you're a refugee, you're forever considered a refugee. That's your biggest issue. So government itself has a big role, and they know it. they just don't want to deal with it, right? They know that they're part of this whole problem, and time and time again, we've seen people who have, from the outside in the community, who have, you know, tried to raise their voices or try to be the difficult ones and ask the difficult questions, get offered some high-level job in the public sector, and there goes their voice, because then they can't say anything. It has happened. So it's very systemic and systematic the way it happens. But then, speaking of corruption within our own sector and within our own industry, I feel like it's all come down to optics. The way people are getting rid of accountability now is throw some refugees on your board and have your ground staff, the staff that people see, your coalface staff, as some people of color, and then no one will ask anything, because, you know, when you try to hold an organization accountable, you go look at their leadership and you go, oh, okay, they've got some refugees, some brown people, some black people on their board. It's all fine. Nobody talks about that middle management where the disconnect is happening, where, you know, the ground staff is trying to push issues up and it's being blocked there, or where the board is trying to make changes and it's being blocked there because, you know, they're just too okay. They're too comfortable with their position.
Thank you.
I would just say education, because, okay, it's going to be very brief. Education, because when the refugee is educated, they can elevate, right, in their career, and they can be barraged, you know, with obstacles. But let's say they're not at least suffering. So when they're educated, they have a lot of power. They can progress in their lives, and then so they do their best and they pray for the rest. That's best.
Thank you. Another question from the audience before we get out of time? Because we could go on for a while, but it'd be great to hear where your thoughts are at. Yes, please. Thank you. Yeah, you can speak to that. It's a great comment. Thank you. I actually, yeah, thank you. A round of applause definitely for that one, because there is a lot of language. There's an exercise I do with a lot of my workshop participants and clients. When I ask them to list the acronyms and labels used for people of color, and we can come up with dozens sometimes in a 10-minute workshop session. It's like CALD, culturally and linguistically diverse, person of color, BIPOC, ASL, ESL, whatever, NESB, non-English speaking background, black, Asian, minority, ethnicity. Like, we could go on for days. There are so many different labels and acronyms used, and POC is just another one. And when one becomes attached to too many negative connotations, it becomes dirty. So white progressives invent a new one. They're like, oh, now they want to be called POC. Never really having a committee meeting with the POC, just coming up with a new term. Yeah, right? So I think it's really important to point that out, because, yeah, even like ethnic minorities and like all these kind of language, it helps to maintain systems of white supremacy, because we can't go around calling people of no color because they get offended, right? But we've got all this secret, hidden, kind of euphemistic language that basically means non-whites.
Can we start a movement?
We could.
People of no color and people of no culture.
Yeah. Because then that shows how inappropriate it is, right? Like, we've become used to calling people of color, but the minute we say people of no color, we're like, oh, that sounds offensive. But we're okay using POC, you know, we're okay using BIPOC, black, indigenous, people of color, everyone. And it's basically just saying what? Non-whites. When we can get comfortable talking about whites.
We can say non-white and proud.
Yeah.
You know, it's not accurate. Like, you know, there was a comedian, a stand-up comedian who was talking, his son, you know, I'm going to say it now in racist, apologies if I'm offended. So his is from China, so he's Asian. So he was telling his son, his grow up was saying, Dad, I'm one of the whites. And so he said, you know, and so basically what I'm trying to say is that they were not educated because there were no distinct definitions to this white and not white and so forth. So basically even children are reacting in a similar or sarcastic way. Oh, you know, not, you know, so forth. So my point is like, it's just, it just shows more ignorance. And if when we start having this transparency that we talked about earlier, by the way, I was going to cut to another point. You were talking earlier on the condescending compassion. Yes. And that also drives, you know, many terms that describe this. And I want to briefly talk about one thing I heard before the other day. In World Economic Forum, they were talking, the psychologists were warning against toxic positivity, which actually brings a lot of negative things. So people become so lukewarm, right? And they don't empathize with others. A person with grief comes to them and then they say it's okay, and they've just lost, you know, for instance, a parent or so, which is not okay. They need time to, you know, vent those emotions. And then also we become lukewarm and not expressing our ideas or opinions, which becomes very unhealthy. And finally, they will have heart disease problems. Imagine. That is caused by toxic positivity, and that's why psychologists recommend something called realistic optimism. So basically, which is what we're trying to talk about now.
Thank you, Simon. Joseph, you look like you're ready.
No, all good. I know the time is.
leaning
you
right
didn't
in.
allow us to speak more, so it's all
No,
good.
we can go over it.
Can I?
Final thoughts? Yeah.
Yeah. Final thoughts. Whoops. I think I just, as a group, would like us to also consider the incredible burden it is on people like us to not just be constantly decolonizing ourselves and, you know, our own mentality. We came here as refugees and we were fed that colonial, you know, we were right in the middle of that colonial system and machinery, and, you know, became the grateful refugees and blah blah blah. To not just be getting, you know, educating ourselves and unlearning our own practices and cleansing our own minds, but to be leading this conversation forward as well. That's what is always missing from these conversations, from spaces like this, that double-edged sword, because, you know, we have to do it with the mainstream community, but we also have to go back to our own communities and be like, hey guys, so what you're doing is deeply offensive. Can you please not do that? You know, there's just, and there is that danger that the sector or the space, the social justice space, see people of color or refugees or migrants with all the same, they're all painted with the same brush. So, you know, we're all supposed to have the same opinion on these issues. We are all supposed to, you know, act the same way when it comes to, like, you know, if I'm from Afghanistan, Simon's from Syria, our issues are apparently the same, and, you know, we need to be speaking in the same language. So there needs to be a little bit of uncoloring, unpainting that imagery too, and that work always goes unnoticed.
Canvas will become white then.
Just want to mention something, that it's not about being negative or positive today. It's about maybe vending out what's been happening in the last 18 months. And with the positivity, I want to end up that there are seeds of hope that I can notice. So today, like Con was talking about, refugee-led agencies need to be funded by $3 million by his agency, which is amazing to hear that. Because the solutions or the passing over COVID, it wasn't because the government very smart. It's because the partnership that happened with the grassroots community that fixed so many areas and so many states. So we encourage that approach, that there is a support coming up to the ground floor with the emerging community leaders, not the classic ones who wear the tie and always in the consultation for the last 30 years. There is that seeds of hope, and we would like to encourage that. So if you can pass we'd like to have partnership. It's not about only consultation. That partnership with the grassroots is the solution.
Yeah. But on that, it needs to be so much more aggressive. It needs to, you know, push boundaries when it comes to including people in this decision-making spaces, and in not just being patted on the back for doing the bare minimum.
So it's not about making favor. Oh, you're nice, you look good, come in. It's about actually every member on the ground need to be given the opportunity, and not only the opportunity, given the privilege that the government will meet with them. So the government has the privilege to meet with the grassroots community because we are the decision makers, not them. Because of us, the things are working out in different communities, I mean everywhere. But it is the government serving the country. It is not us serving the country. Them serving us. That's why they got these positions.
Thank you.
But we're serving them.
Thank you so much to our panelists. Could you please give everyone a round of applause as we finish up? Thank you. Thank you, Joseph, Simon. We will definitely be furthering this conversation tomorrow morning with Hala and Ruby and Nova Paris tomorrow morning. So join us for that panel. We have another session immediately after this one. Dr. Anastasia, are you on here now? Fantastic. So Dr. Anastasia, please take the stage. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Arfan, for inviting us, and thank you, everyone, for attending.